"I ain't crazy," Mary Beth screamed, her voice echoing through the swamp as she clawed at the rusty chains binding her wrists to the old slave cabin wall. Blood mixed with mud on her torn wedding dress, now nothing but rags after months of imprisonment. "You're gonna burn in hell for what you done to them poor girls." Her voice cracked as Robert's shadow filled the doorway. That same charming smile that once fooled her now twisted into something evil. "Sugar," he drawled. "Ain't nobody gonna believe a mad woman." But what he didn't know was that Granny Moss had already loosened them chains, and tonight the truth was fixing to set itself free. Now listen here, y'all, because what I'm fixing to tell you is a story that'll make your heart ache something fierce. It's about a young gal named Mary Beth Coleman, prettiest little thing you ever did see, with eyes blue as a summer sky and hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold. Mary Beth was barely 18 when this tale begins, back in them cotton fields of Alabama, where the air hung thick as molasses and dreams seemed as far away as the stars. Her daddy, Colonel Samuel Coleman, was what folks called a cotton king, rich as Midas and twice as mean when the mood struck him. A woman ain't meant for thinking, just for minding, the colonel would holler every time the cotton harvest came up short, and Lord have mercy, that poor chilly Mary Beth would watch her mama, Miss Emma, scurry to the kitchen like a whipped dog, her cheek red as a ripe tomato from where his hand had struck. Miss Emma would stand there by that old wood stove, tears dripping into the cornbread batter, whispering prayers under her breath. "Lord Jesus, please make him a kinder man," she'd whisper, but them prayers seemed to bounce right off the ceiling, like raindrops on a tin roof. Now, Mary Beth was different from most gals in them parts. The colonel had sent her off to one of them fancy ladies' colleges up in Atlanta, where them highfalutin teachers filled her head with all sorts of notions about women being able to think and dream and maybe even speak their minds. Child came back home with books tucked under her arm and fire burning in them blue eyes. "Mama," she'd say, finding Miss Emma crying in the pantry after another one of the colonel's fits, "there's got to be something better than this. Women don't have to live like scared rabbits all their lives." But Miss Emma, bless her broken heart, would just shake her head and dab at her eyes with her apron. "Sugar, you best pray the good Lord sends you a husband different from your daddy, 'cause a woman alone in this world ain't worth a Confederate dollar." That's when young Robert James Mitchell came riding into their lives like some kind of fairy tale prince. He was a lawyer, 25 years old and handsome as sin, with dark hair slicked back and a smile that could charm the birds right out of the trees. Came calling on Mary Beth 3 times a week, always with flowers in his hand and honey-sweet words spilling from his lips. "You're different from these other gals, Sugar," he'd tell her, as they sat on that old porch swing, the scent of magnolias heavy in the evening air. "You got education, refinement. You deserve better than this God-forsaken place." Mary Beth's heart would flutter like a butterfly caught in a jar every time he spoke them words. Here was a man who saw her worth, who recognized that she was more than just another pretty face waiting to be married off like a prized heifer. The proposal came on a night when the fireflies were dancing and the mockingbirds were singing their evening songs. Robert got down on one knee right there in the rose garden, that silver moon shining down on them like God's own spotlight. "Mary Beth Coleman," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "marry me, and I'll take you away from all this sadness. With me you'll never know tears of sorrow, only tears of joy." That poor Chili's heart nearly burst with happiness. Finally, she'd found her salvation in the form of this charming man who promised her a life filled with love instead of fear. The wedding was the talk of 3 counties, held in that little white Baptist church where Mary Beth had been. Baptized as a baby, she walked down that aisle in a dress of Brussels lace that cost the colonel his last saved dollar, looking like an angel descended from heaven itself. But here's the thing about fairy tales, honey. Sometimes the prince ain't quite what he seems to be. And poor little Mary Beth, bless her trusting heart, was about to learn that lesson the hard way. As she said them sacred vows, promising to love, honor, and obey, she was too caught up in her dreams to notice the way Robert's eyes glittered when he whispered, "Now you're mine, Sugar, all mine." And what happened after that wedding night? Well, that's when this story takes a turn darker than a moonless night in the deepest part of the swamp. Before we continue this emotional story, put in the comments below which city you're watching from. It'll be a pleasure to give your comment a little heart. Now let's continue this exciting story. Well, now let me tell you what happened after that wedding day, because it's going to break your heart into 1,000 pieces. Mary Beth thought she was walking into paradise, but Lord have mercy, She was stepping straight into another kind of nightmare. The morning after their wedding night, Robert woke up different, like somebody had blown out a candle behind his eyes. Gone was that charming smile, replaced by something cold as January frost. "Get dressed," he told Mary Beth, his voice flat as day-old cornbread. "We're leaving for Mississippi today." "But honey," Mary Beth said, confusion clouding her pretty face, "I thought we were going to honeymoon in New Orleans like you promised." Robert's jaw tightened like a steel trap. "Plans changed, sugar. We got business to tend to." That first red flag should have sent Mary Beth running, but poor Chili was still drunk on the dream of escape. She packed her few belongings, kissing her mama goodbye one last time. Miss Emma, still recovering from her latest beating, clutched Mary Beth's hand with fingers that shook like autumn leaves. "You write to me, baby girl," Miss Emma whispered, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. "Promise me you'll write." "Every week, Mama," Mary Beth promised, not knowing them would be the last words she'd speak to her mama for years to come. The journey to Mississippi felt like riding into the mouth of hell itself. Robert drove that wagon harder than necessary, barely stopping to let the horses rest. When Mary Beth tried to make conversation, he'd grunt like an old boar or ignore her altogether. The sweet man who'd courted her had vanished like morning mist. "Robert, honey, are you feeling poorly?" she asked as they camped by a muddy creek the second night. "You seemed different." He looked at her then with eyes harder than river stones. "I'm fine. You just need to learn when to keep that mouth shut." Mary Beth's blood turned cold as winter rain. Them words sounded too much like her daddy's voice for comfort. The plantation Robert brought her to sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by swampland that stretched for miles like God's own prison. The house was grand enough, 2 stories, of white columns and wraparound porches, but something about it felt wrong, like a beautiful apple with rot at its core. "This is temporary," Robert said as he helped her down from the wagon, his grip on her arm tighter than necessary, "just while I tend to some family business." But temporary stretched into weeks, then months. The isolation ate at Mary Beth's, sold like acid. The nearest town was a day's ride through treacherous swamp roads, and Robert made it clear she wasn't to leave the plantation grounds without his permission. "A lady don't go gallivanting around the countryside like some common field hand," he'd say whenever she asked to visit neighbors or go to town. "Your place is here, tending to the house." The workers on the plantation were strange folk, rough, men who looked at Mary Beth with eyes that made her skin crawl. When she tried to be friendly, they'd turn away or mutter under their breath. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on what. Then Robert started controlling her letters. "I'll post them for you," he'd say, taking the letters. She wrote to her mama and daddy, but weeks passed without any replies, and Mary Beth's heart grew heavier than wet cotton. "Honey, are you sure you mailed my letters?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the sound of bullfrogs and night creatures filling the heavy air. Robert's face darkened like a storm cloud. "You questioning me, woman?" "No, I just—" "A wife obeys her husband," he snapped, his voice sharp as a whip crack. "That's what the good book says. Maybe your fancy education forgot to teach you that." Mary Beth felt her world tilting like a house in a hurricane. This wasn't the man she'd married. This wasn't the salvation she'd prayed for through all them. Years of watching her mama suffer. Things got worse when she tried to make friends with the house servants. Lily May, a young woman about her own age, worked in the kitchen and always seemed nervous as a cat in a dog pound. Every time Mary Beth approached her, the girl would tremble and look around, fearful-like. "Lily May, you don't have to be afraid of me," Mary Beth said one afternoon, trying to help with the cooking. "We could be friends." But the girl just shook, her head, tears spilling down her dark cheeks. "No, ma'am. Master Robert, he don't like us talking to you. He say you ask too many questions." That night, Mary Beth confronted Robert about his treatment of the workers. "They're scared of you." "Robert, why won't you let me talk to them?" Robert's face went dead calm, which was somehow more terrifying than anger. "Because," he said slowly, like he was talking to a simple child, "you don't understand how things work here. This ain't your daddy's plantation where everybody's soft and spoiled. Here we maintain order, but they're human beings." The slap came so fast Mary Beth didn't see it coming. Her cheek burned like fire, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut her lip. Robert stood over her, his hand still raised, and for a moment she saw pure evil in his eyes. "Don't you ever," he said, his voice quiet as death, "question my authority again. You're my wife now, which means you belong to me, body and soul. You'll learn your place, or I'll teach it to you the hard way." As Mary Beth pressed her hand to her burning cheek, tears streaming down her face, she realized the horrible truth. She'd traded one monster for another, maybe even worse than her daddy, because at least she'd known the Colonel was mean. Robert had fooled her completely, used her desperation against her like a weapon. That night she lay in their bed listening to Robert's snores, her cheek throbbing and her heart broken. Outside she could hear strange sounds from the old slave quarters, crying, whimpering like wounded animals. When she asked Robert about it the next morning, he just smiled that cold smile and said, "Must be your imagination, sugar. Maybe that fancy education of yours is making you hear things." But Mary Beth knew what she heard, and she was fixing to find out the truth even if it killed her. Now listen here, y'all, because what happened next would make the devil himself shudder with shame. Poor Mary Beth was about to discover that her new husband's plantation held secrets darker than the bottom of a well at midnight. It started with the disappearances. Mary Beth noticed that young girls from the surrounding sharecropper families would vanish for weeks at a time, then return different, hollow-eyed and broken, like somebody had reached inside their souls and torn something out. The families would whisper it was domestic work at the big house, but Mary Beth never saw hide nor hair of these girls during their supposed employment. "Robert, honey," she asked one morning over breakfast, her voice still hoarse from crying herself to sleep, "where are all them young ladies who come to work here? I'd love to have some female company." Robert's fork froze halfway to his mouth and his eyes went cold as a snake's belly. "Ain't no concern of yours, sugar. Women's minds weren't made for worrying about business affairs." That very afternoon, Mary Beth met one of these mysterious workers face to face. Lily May was scrubbing the kitchen floor, her movements jerky and nervous like a frightened rabbit. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, with skin the color of rich coffee and eyes that had seen too much sorrow for someone so young. "Lily May," Mary Beth said gently, kneeling down beside her, "you look plumb tuckered out, honey. When's the last time you had a good meal?" The girl's eyes filled with tears faster than a spring flood. "Please, ma'am," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Master Robert say we ain't supposed to talk to you. He say bad things happen to girls who can't keep their mouths shut." Mary Beth's blood turned to ice water. "What kind of bad things, sweetie?" But Lily May just shook her head violently and went back to scrubbing, her thin shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. That night Mary Beth lay awake praying to the Lord for understanding, but the answer she was fixing to get would be more terrible than any nightmare. The truth started revealing itself like a slow burn in fire. Mary Beth began paying closer attention to the comings and goings around the plantation. Strange men would arrive at odd hours, well-dressed gentlemen who looked like they'd never done an honest day's work in their lives. They'd disappear into the old slave quarters with Robert, and terrible sounds would drift across the night air. Crying, pleading, sounds that made Mary Beth's soul weep. One moonless night, when Robert was off on one of his mysterious business trips, Mary Beth couldn't stand it no more. Them sounds of suffering were calling to her Christian heart like a wounded lamb crying for its mama. She wrapped herself in a dark shawl and crept toward the old quarters, her bare feet silent on the dew-soaked grass. What she found there nearly stopped her heart cold. Through a crack in the wooden wall, she could see inside one of the cabins. Young girls, some no older than 14, were huddled together like cattle in a pen, their clothes torn and their faces streaked with tears. They were chained to the walls like animals, and the smell of fear and despair hung in the air thicker than smoke from a house fire. Mary Beth bit her fist to keep from screaming, her whole body trembling like leaves in a hurricane. These weren't employees, they were prisoners. And her husband, the man she'd trusted with her life and soul, was their jailer. As she turned to flee, a strong hand grabbed her shoulder like a vice. "Well, well," Robert's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "What do we have here? My curious little wife sticking her nose where it don't belong?" Mary Beth spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. Robert's face was a mask of calm fury, more terrifying than any rage. Behind him stood two of his rough workers, their eyes glinting with menace. "Robert," she gasped, "them poor girls, they're chained up like animals. This ain't right, this ain't Christian." Robert's laugh was colder than a January wind. "Christian?" he repeated, stepping closer until she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Sugar, you got a lot to learn about the real world. Them girls got food and shelter, more than they'd have in them shacks they came from." "But they're prisoners," Mary Beth cried, tears streaming down her face. "You can't keep people against their will, it's against God's law." Robert's hand shot out and grabbed her chin, his fingers digging into her flesh. "The only law that matters. Here is my law. And you, my dear wife, just broke the most important rule, mind your own business." He dragged her back to the house, his grip so tight it left bruises on her arm. Inside their bedroom, he threw her onto the bed like a sack of grain and stood over her, his shadow falling across her like the wings of a vulture. "Now listen good, Mary Beth," he said, his voice quiet but deadly as poison. "You didn't see nothing tonight, you didn't hear nothing. Because if you ever mention what you think you saw to anybody, and I mean anybody, them girls ain't gonna be the only ones suffering, you understand me?" Mary Beth nodded, too terrified to speak, but inside her heart a fire was burning, not of love or hope, but of righteous anger. This man had deceived her, trapped her, and now he was threatening her. But worst of all, he was hurting innocent girls, and that was something her Christian soul couldn't abide. That night, while Robert slept, Mary Beth crept down to the kitchen and found what she was looking for. A loose floorboard where she'd seen Lily May hide things. Underneath, wrapped in an old piece of cloth, were letters, dozens of them written in shaky handwriting, all beginning the same way: "Please help us," and "Somebody save us." Her hands trembled as she read account after account of girls brought here under false promises, then held prisoner for unspeakable purposes. Some letters mentioned names she recognized, respected men from town, including the sheriff and the judge. Robert wasn't working alone. This was bigger than one evil man. This was a whole network of devils masquerading as respectable citizens. As dawn broke over the plantation, Mary Beth knelt by her bedroom window and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. "Lord Jesus," she whispered, "show me what to do. I can't save myself, but maybe I can save them poor girls." But what Mary Beth didn't know was that Robert had been watching her every move, and her Christian mercy was about to become her greatest danger. "Lord have mercy. What I'm fixing to tell you next will chill your bones worse than a December wind blowing through a graveyard." Poor Mary Beth was about to learn just how deep this river of evil really ran, and honey, it was deeper than the Mississippi itself. The days following her terrible discovery crawled by slower than molasses in January. Mary Beth tried to act normal, cooking Robert's meals and tending the house, but inside she was dying by inches. Every time she looked at her husband's handsome face, all she could see was the monster lurking underneath that charming smile. Robert, bless his black heart, seemed to enjoy watching her suffer. He'd catch her staring into space and say with a cold grin, "Penny for your thoughts, sugar? You been mighty quiet lately?" "Just tired is all," Mary Beth would whisper, but her hands would shake like autumn leaves whenever he got too close. The breakthrough came 3 days later when Mary Beth was cleaning out Robert's study, something she'd never been allowed to do before. But Robert had ridden to town for supplies, and desperation made her bold as brass. Hidden behind some law books, she found a leather journal that made her blood turn to ice water. Page after page detailed the whole sickening operation. Robert weren't just keeping them poor girls prisoner. He was running a business that would make the devil himself weep with shame. Rich men from 3 counties would come to the plantation, paying good money to hurt innocent children. And the names, oh Lord Jesus, the names in that book read like a who's who of respectable society. Judge Harrison Blackwood, the man who'd married her and Robert. Sheriff Coleman Briggs, who was supposed to protect folks. Banker Wesley Thornton, who held the mortgages on half the farms in the county. Even Reverend Samuel Pike from the big church in town. Men who stood in pulpits preaching about righteousness while they were committing sins that had no names. Mary Beth's stomach churned like a butter churn in a hurricane. She stumbled to the window, gasping for air, her whole world spinning like a child's top. These weren't just random criminals. This was organized evil that reached into every corner of their community. No wonder Robert felt so confident. He had the law, the church, and the money all in his pocket, but the worst discovery was yet to come. At the back of the journal, she found a section labeled Future Acquisitions. Her own name was there, along with notes about her education and breeding potential. Robert had been planning this from the very beginning. He'd never loved her. She was just another piece of property to be used and discarded when he got tired of her. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance sent Mary Beth scurrying like a field mouse. She shoved the journal back in its hiding place just as Robert's voice echoed through the house. "Mary Beth, where you at, sugar?" "Coming, honey," she called, her voice cracking like dried leather. She rushed downstairs, her heart beating faster than a hummingbird's wings. Robert stood in the parlor, muddy boots tracking dirt across her clean floors, but his eyes were what made her soul freeze solid. They were studying her like a cat studies a wounded bird before it pounces. "You been busy while I was gone?" he asked. His voice casual as Sunday morning, but there was steel underneath them words. "Just tidying up," Mary Beth managed, wiping her sweaty palms on her apron. "Thought I'd clean your study since you've been so hard at work lately." Robert's smile spread across his face like spilled molasses, sweet but sticky. "That's mighty thoughtful." "Have you, darling? But you know I don't like nobody messing with my papers." "I didn't touch nothing important," she lied, but her voice sounded hollow as an empty well. That evening, Robert prepared her sweet tea himself, something he'd never done before. "Drink up, sugar," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. "You look peaked. This'll help you sleep better." Mary Beth stared at that glass like it was a coiled rattlesnake. The tea was darker than usual, with a bitter smell that made her stomach clench. She knew, sure as she knew her own name, that Robert had put something in it, but she also knew that refusing would be as good as signing her death warrant. "Thanks." "You, honey," she whispered, raising the glass to her lips but barely letting it touch them. When Robert turned away, she poured most of it into the potted plant beside her chair. Within an hour, the room started spinning like a child's toy. Her thoughts became fuzzy as cotton balls, and her limbs felt heavy as lead weights. Whatever Robert had given her was powerful stuff, designed to make her helpless as a newborn kitten. "Feeling poorly, sugar?" Robert asked, his voice seeming to come from far away. "Maybe you should lie down." As he helped her to bed, his hands lingering longer than necessary, Mary Beth realized with crystal clarity that she was in mortal danger. Robert suspected she'd found something, and he was fixing to make sure she never told a soul about it. "Robert," she mumbled through lips that felt thick as honey. "I don't feel right." "Shh," he whispered, tucking the covers around her like she was a child. "Just sleep now. When you wake up, everything will be different." But Mary Beth fought that drug with every ounce of strength her mama had given her. She bit her tongue until it bled, using the pain to stay conscious. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Robert search the room, checking to see if anything was out of place. When he found nothing suspicious, he sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her with the patience of a spider waiting for a fly to tire itself out in its web. "You know, Mary Beth," he said softly, "I really hoped you'd be smarter than this. Your education made me think you might be different from the others, but curiosity killed the cat, sugar, and it might just kill you too." Mary Beth's heart nearly stopped beating. He knew, somehow, some way, Robert knew she'd discovered his terrible secret. And tomorrow, when that drug wore off, she was going to have to face whatever punishment he had planned for disobedient wives. As fake sleep finally claimed her, Mary Beth's last conscious thought was a prayer. "Lord Jesus, if you're listening, please send me a miracle, because I'm going to need divine intervention to survive what's coming next." Little did she know that help was closer than she thought, but it would come with a price that might cost her everything she had left, including her sanity. Well now, if you thought things couldn't get worse for poor Mary Beth, you ain't seen. Nothing yet. What happened next would test her faith and her sanity beyond anything a human soul should have to bear. Mary Beth woke up the next morning feeling like she'd been trampled by a whole herd of cattle. Her head pounded worse than thunder during a summer storm, and her mouth tasted like she'd been chewing on old copper pennies. But praise the Lord, her mind was clear enough to remember everything: the journal, the drugs, and Robert's threats. Robert was already gone when she stumbled to the kitchen, but he'd left her breakfast laid out neat as you please. Grits, bacon, and a tall glass of that sweet tea she used to love, but now just looking at it made her stomach turn over like a fish on dry land. "Lily May," she whispered when the young woman came in to collect the dishes, "we need to talk, somewhere safe." The girl's eyes went wide as saucers, and she started shaking her head like her life depended on it. "No, ma'am, Master Robert, he told me to watch you real careful. He say you been sick and might start imagining things." Mary Beth's heart sank. Lower than a stone in deep water, Robert was already poisoning the well, making everyone think she was losing her mind. But she couldn't give up. Not when innocent lives were at stake. For 3 days, Mary Beth pretended to drink that drugged tea, pouring it into plants when nobody was looking. She had to stay sharp, had to find a way to help them poor girls and get word to someone who could stop this nightmare. But every person she might have trusted was either in Robert's pocket or too far away to reach. On the 4th day, her prayers were answered in the most unexpected way. While pretending to tend the garden, she found Lily May behind the tool shed crying her heart out. "What's wrong, honey?" Mary Beth asked, kneeling down beside the sobbing girl. "My little sister," Lily May whispered through her tears. They brought her here yesterday. She ain't but 14 years old, and Master Robert, he say she gonna join the others in the old quarters." Mary Beth felt her blood turn to fire. 14 years old, the same age she'd been when she first started dreaming of escape from her daddy's house. "We got to get her out of here, Lily May. We got to get all of them out." "Can't," Lily May sobbed. "Ain't no way. They got guards and them men from town, they come and go as they please. We try to run, they catch us and make things worse. Much worse." But Mary Beth grabbed the girl's hands, holding them tight. "Listen to me, sugar. I found Robert's journal. I know about everything. All the names, all the money, everything. If we can get that book to the right people, we can stop this." For the first time, hope flickered in Lily May's eyes like a candle in the wind. "You really think so, ma'am?" I know so. But we got to be smart about it, and we got to trust each other." That night they put their plan into motion. While Robert was entertaining some of his business associates in the parlor, Mary Beth and Lily May snuck into his study. Working by moonlight, they carefully copied the most damning pages from his journal. Mary Beth's education finally proving useful for something good. But just as they finished, they heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots that could only belong to Robert. Mary Beth's heart jumped into her throat like a scared rabbit. "Hide," she whispered to Lily May, shoving the copied pages into her dress. "No matter what happens, you hide." Robert appeared in the doorway like the shadow of death itself, his eyes glittering with suspicion and something much worse. "What you doing in here, sugar? It's mighty late to be wandering around." "Couldn't sleep," Mary Beth said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thought I'd fetch a book to read." Robert's gaze swept the room like a hawk looking for prey. "Funny thing about sleep troubles," he said, stepping closer. "Sometimes they get worse when folks stop taking their medicine." Mary Beth's mouth went dry as desert sand. He knew. Somehow he'd figured out she wasn't drinking the drugged tea anymore. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, but her voice cracked like thin ice. Robert reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small brown bottle. "This here's a special remedy, darling. Helps nervous ladies calm down when they get too excitable. You've been mighty excitable lately. Robert, please." Mary Beth backed toward the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I ain't done nothing wrong. Haven't you?" His voice was soft as silk, but deadly as poison. "See, I had a talk with Judge Blackwood today. Told him my poor wife been acting strange lately, seeing things that ain't there, hearing voices, making up wild stories about respectable men." The trap was closing around her like quicksand. Mary Beth realized with crystal clarity that Robert had been planning this all along. He was going to drug her senseless, declare her insane, and lock her away where nobody would ever believe a word she said. "The judge agrees with me," Robert continued, moving closer like a cat stalking a mouse. "Says sometimes the only kindness you can show a mad woman is to make sure she can't hurt herself or others with her delusions." "I ain't mad," Mary Beth cried. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew how desperate they sounded. "Course you are, sugar. Why else would you be sneaking around in the middle of the night, making up stories about journals and crimes? Poor little thing. All that fancy education done scrambled your brains." That's when Mary Beth made the biggest mistake of her life. She ran. Panic overtook her like a flash flood, and she bolted for the door. But Robert was ready for her. He caught her arm and spun her around, his grip strong as iron shackles. Now, he said, holding up that brown bottle. "This'll help you sleep real peaceful like, and tomorrow we'll get you the help you need." Mary Beth fought like a wildcat, kicking and clawing, but Robert was stronger. He forced that bitter medicine down her throat while she choked and gagged, her world already starting to spin like a child's top. As the drugs pulled her down into darkness, Mary Beth heard Robert talking to someone else, another man's voice she didn't recognize. "Take her to the old cabin by the swamp," Robert was saying. "Granny Moss knows what to do. Tell her this one needs special attention. Can't have her talking to nobody about her condition." The last thing Mary Beth remembered before everything went black was thinking about Lily May, hidden somewhere in that study, and praying to the Lord that at least one person would survive to tell the truth about what was happening in this house of horrors. But what Mary Beth didn't know was that her fight for survival was just beginning, and the old cabin by the swamp held secrets even darker than Robert's journal. "Lord Almighty, what I'm about to tell you will make your soul weep for the suffering that one human being can inflict upon another." Poor Mary Beth was fixing to learn that sometimes the deepest pit of despair ain't the bottom. There's always another level of hell waiting below. Mary Beth woke up in darkness so complete, it felt like being buried alive. Her head throbbed, worse than a church bell struck by lightning, and every bone in her body ached like she'd been thrown from a runaway horse. The air was thick and musty, filled with the smell of rotting wood and something else, the sour stench of human misery. Her eyes slowly adjusted. She could make out the rough wooden walls of what looked like an old slave cabin, probably abandoned since before the war. The floor was dirt, packed hard by decades of desperate footsteps, and the only light came from cracks between the weathered boards. "You awake, child?" came a voice from the shadows, gravelly and worn like an old leather boot. Mary Beth tried to sit up, but found her wrists and ankles bound with rope that bit into her skin like hungry fire ants. Who's there?" she whispered, her voice hoarse as a crow's call. An old woman shuffled into the dim light, white-haired, bent over like a question mark, with eyes that had seen too much sorrow for one lifetime. "Name's Granny Moss," the woman said, settling herself on a three-legged stool. "And I'm your keeper now, I reckon." "Please," Mary Beth gasped, struggling against her bonds. "You got to help me. Robert, my husband, he's keeping girls prisoner, innocent children. We got to—" "Hush that noise," Granny Moss cut her off, but there was no meanness in her voice, just bone-deep weariness. "Ain't no point in fighting what can't be changed. I learned that lesson years ago when they brought my Sarah here." "Sarah? The bee?" Old woman's face crumpled like paper in a fire. "My daughter. Sweetest little thing you ever did see, with hair like spun gold and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She was 16 when she caught Robert's eye. He promised her work in the big house, promised good wages to help our family." Granny Moss paused, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. "That was 5 years ago. They brought her back to me in a pine box 3 months later. Said she got sick, but I knew better. I saw the bruises, saw what they'd done to my baby girl." Mary Beth's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. "Oh, Lord Jesus, I'm so sorry." "Sorry don't bring back the dead," Granny Moss said, her voice flat as still water. "But it taught me that fighting these devils only makes things worse for everybody. So when Robert offered me this job, watching over his troubled ladies, I took it. Least this way I can try to make things a little easier for y'all." Over the following days, Mary Beth learned the horrible routine of her new existence. 3 times a day, Granny Moss would bring her food laced with drugs that kept her mind fuzzy as cotton and her body weak as a newborn kitten. The old woman would sit and talk while Mary Beth ate, sharing stories of other women who'd been brought to this cabin over the years. "There was Miss Catherine from Vicksburg," Granny Moss would say, spooning medicine into Mary Beth's mouth. "Pretty. Little thing like yourself. Husband said she was seeing things that weren't there. Stayed here near 2 years before the consumption took her. And Miss Eleanor from Natchez. Poor child couldn't stop crying about some terrible secret she claimed to know. Her family was right grateful when Robert helped them understand she needed special care." Each story was the same. Women who'd learned too much, seen too much, or simply become inconvenient to the men who owned them. All of them labeled as mad. All of them disappeared into this nightmare where nobody would ever think to look. The worst part wasn't the drugs or the imprisonment. It was watching her own mind slowly slip away like sand through her fingers. Some days Mary Beth couldn't remember her own name. Other days, she'd wake up convinced that her mama was calling for her from outside the cabin, only to remember that Miss Emma was hundreds of miles away and probably thought her daughter was living happily ever after. "Why?" Mary Beth asked one afternoon when the fog in her brain had lifted just enough for her to form words. "Why are you helping him do this?" Granny Moss was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Because," she finally whispered, "he's got my grandson. Little Tommy, Sarah's boy. Lives with Robert now, calls him Uncle. Robert made it real clear what would happen to that child if I ever stopped cooperating. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, like dominoes tumbling down. Robert didn't just use fear and money to control people, he used love, the most powerful weapon of all." Months passed in a haze of drugs and despair. Mary Beth lost track of time, lost track of herself. Sometimes she'd wake up and think she was back home in Alabama calling for her mama. Other times, she'd believe she really was crazy, that everything she remembered about Robert and the girls was just the fevered imaginings of a broken mind. Robert came to visit every few weeks, always accompanied by respectable-looking men who would examine Mary Beth like she was a prize heifer at auction. She'd sit there drugged and docile, while they discussed her condition in clinical terms. "As you can see, Judge Blackwood," Robert would say, "the poor dear has deteriorated considerably. The family madness has taken complete hold. Tragic, the judge would reply, shaking his head sadly. But you're doing the Christian thing, keeping her comfortable and away from society where she might hurt someone. What about her family? Another visitor asked once. Don't they want to see her? Robert's voice was smooth as honey. I write to them regularly, keeping them informed, but seeing her in this condition would only cause them more pain. Sometimes love means protecting people from difficult truths. Mary Beth wanted to scream, wanted to tell them all that she wasn't crazy, that she knew exactly what Robert was doing, but the drugs kept her tongue thick and her thoughts scattered like leaves in a hurricane. All she could do was sit there and nod when they asked if she was being treated well. The breaking point came on a day when the medicine had worn off more than usual. Mary Beth was sitting by the small window, looking out at the swamp and thinking about how easy it would be to just give up, when she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. A child's voice, crying in the distance. A little girl, calling for her mama. That's just the wind, Granny Moss said quickly, but Mary Beth could see the fear in the old woman's eyes. No, Mary Beth whispered, clarity returning to her mind like dawn breaking over the horizon. That's a child, a real child, and she's scared. For the first time in months, Mary Beth felt the fire of righteous anger burning in her chest. Robert was still out there, still hurting innocent babies, while she sat in this cabin letting herself waste away. Her mama hadn't raised her to be a quitter, and by God's grace, she wasn't fixing to become one now. Granny Moss, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. We got to stop this. We got to find a way to help them children, even if it kills us both. But what Mary Beth didn't know was that help was coming from the most unexpected place, and it would test everything she thought she knew about right and wrong. Sweet Lord in heaven, what happened next was like watching a miracle bloom in the middle of a graveyard. Sometimes the most broken souls can find strength in each other when all hope seems lost. And that's exactly what was fixing to happen in that God-forsaken swamp cabin. The sound of that crying child haunted Mary Beth for days, cutting through the drug-induced fog like a sharp blade through thick cotton. Every time Granny Moss brought her the drugged food, Mary Beth found herself thinking clearer, fighting harder against the medicine that was meant to steal her mind. You've been acting mighty strange lately, Granny Moss observed one evening, spooning soup into Mary Beth's mouth. Fighting the medicine more than usual. That ain't wise, child. That little girl, Mary Beth whispered, her tongue still thick, but her eyes blazing with determination. She's still out there, ain't she? Still crying for her mama. Granny Moss's hand trembled so bad she almost dropped the spoon. Don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Mary Beth grabbed the old woman's wrist with surprising strength. So you hear her too, just like you heard your Sarah crying all them years ago. The old woman's face crumpled like wet paper, and tears started flowing down her cheeks like a river that had been dammed up too long. Stop, she whispered. Please. Stop, I can't bear to remember. But Mary Beth held on tight. How many more, Granny? How many more children got to suffer while we sit here doing nothing? How many more mothers got to lose their babies because we're too scared to fight? You don't understand, Granny Moss burst out, her voice breaking like dried kindling. I tried to fight once. After they killed my Sarah, I went to the sheriff, to the preacher, to anybody who'd listen. But they all said the same thing. Sarah was a troubled girl who got herself in a bad situation. Nobody would believe me. So you gave up. I tried to keep going, but then Robert took Tommy, my grandson, my Sarah's only child. He was just a baby then, and Robert said if I ever caused trouble again, something terrible would happen to him. What was I supposed to do? Let them kill the only family I had left? Mary Beth's heart broke for this broken woman, but her resolve only grew stronger. What if I told you there was a way to save Tommy and stop Robert at the same time? What if I told you I had proof of everything he's done? Granny Moss wiped her eyes with her apron. What kind of proof? Before they brought me here, I copied pages from Robert's journal. Names, dates, money amounts, everything. Mary Beth leaned forward, her voice urgent as a prayer. I hid them papers where only someone I trust could find them. But I need your help to get word to the right people. For the first time since Mary Beth had known her, hope flickered in Granny Moss's eyes like a candle flame fighting against the wind. You really think we could stop him? I know we can, but it's going to take both of us, and it's going to be dangerous as walking through a pit of rattlesnakes. Over the next week, they planned their rebellion like generals preparing for war. Granny Moss started giving Mary Beth smaller doses of the medicine, telling Robert that the patient was becoming resistant and needed a different treatment. This bought them precious time for Mary Beth's mind to clear completely. The old woman also began gathering information, watching guard schedules, listening to conversations, learning where the children were being held. It turned out there were 6 girls being kept in different locations around the plantation, including Lily May's little sister. "There's a traveling preacher coming through next week," Granny Moss whispered during one of their secret planning sessions. "Reverend Johnson from up north. Word is he's one of them abolitionists, speaks out against folks who hurt children and such. Maybe we could get word to him. That might be our only chance," Mary Beth agreed. "But how do we reach him without Robert knowing?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Late one night they heard scratching at the cabin wall. Mary Beth's heart jumped, thinking it might be Robert or one of his men. But instead, a familiar voice whispered through the wooden. "Slats, Miss Mary Beth, that you in there?" "Lily May." Mary Beth could hardly believe her ears. "What are you doing here, child?" "Been looking for you for months," the girl whispered back. "Master Robert told everybody you went crazy and had to be sent away, but I knew better. I kept them papers you hid, ma'am. Been carrying them with me ever since." Mary Beth nearly wept with relief. "Thank the Lord. Are you safe? What about your sister?" "She's alive, but barely. They got her in the old tobacco barn with 3 other girls. I've been bringing them scraps when I can, but I can't do much more without getting caught." "Listen careful," Mary Beth said urgently. "There's a preacher coming next week, Reverend Johnson. You got to find a way to get them papers to him. Tell him everything you've seen, everything you know. But what about you, and what about Granny Moss?" Granny Moss spoke up for the first time. "Don't you worry about us, child. We old and ain't got much left to lose. But you and them other girls, you got your whole lives ahead of you." But their planning was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching through the swamp. Robert's voice cut through the night air like a knife. "Granny, you in there? Got some visitors who want to check on our patient." Mary Beth's blood turned to ice. If Robert found Lily May here, it would mean death for all of them. "Go," she whispered frantically. "Take them papers and run. Don't look back, no matter what happens. I can't leave you. You got to. You're the only hope them other girls have." As Lily May disappeared into the darkness, Robert burst through the cabin door with 2 men Mary Beth didn't recognize. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure they could hear it, but she forced herself to act drugged and confused. How's our patient tonight?" Robert asked Granny Moss, but his eyes were scanning the cabin suspiciously. "Same as always," the old woman replied, her voice steady as stone. "Quiet and manageable." Robert walked over to Mary Beth and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You been hearing anything strange lately, sugar? Any visitors you shouldn't have?" Mary Beth let her eyes roll back and mumbled incoherently, playing the part of a madwoman, even as her heart screamed with rage. "Seems normal enough," one of the visitors said, "though I thought I heard voices when we rode up." "Just the wind through them cypress trees," Granny Moss said quickly. "Plays tricks on folks' ears in this swamp." Robert stared at both women for a long moment, his eyes cold as winter stars. "Maybe so," he said finally, "but I think it's time to move our patient somewhere more secure. Can't be too careful with valuable property." As the men left, Mary Beth and Granny Moss exchanged a look of pure terror. Robert suspected something, and their time was running out faster than sand through an hourglass. "Lord Jesus," Mary Beth whispered, "please let that girl reach the preacher in time, because if she don't, we're all going to be lost forever." But what Mary Beth didn't know was that Lily May wasn't the only one who'd been watching and waiting for the right moment to strike back against the devil himself. Good Lord Almighty, what I'm fixing to tell you next will make your heart race faster than a Mustang with its tail on fire. Sometimes when you're staring death in the face, the only choice left is to run straight toward the light, even if it means stepping through the fires of hell itself. The very next morning, Robert arrived. At dawn with 4 of his roughest men, their faces harder than granite and their intentions clear as crystal. Mary Beth's blood turned to ice water when she saw them loading heavy chains and a wooden crate that looked suspiciously like a coffin. "Time to move our patient to more suitable accommodations," Robert announced, his voice cheerful as a Sunday morning, but his eyes cold as a winter grave. "Found a nice quiet place deeper in the swamp where she won't be disturbed by any more visitors." Granny Moss stepped forward, her old bones creaking but her spirit straight as a church steeple. "She ain't ready to be moved, Master Robert. Still too sick, too weak. That's exactly why she needs better care," Robert replied, but there was steel underneath them honey-sweet words. "Don't you worry, Granny. Your services won't be needed anymore. I got other arrangements for you, too." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Mary Beth realized with crystal clarity that Robert intended to eliminate both of them, probably make it look like they'd wandered into the swamp and got lost, food for the alligators and snapping turtles. But the Lord works in mysterious ways. And just as Robert's men started forward, the sky opened up like the heavens themselves were weeping. Rain came down in sheets, thick as curtains, and thunder crashed overhead like the voice of God himself expressing his righteous anger. "We'll wait for the storm to pass," Robert shouted over the wind. "Can't risk losing our cargo in this weather." That storm was Mary Beth's answered prayer, but she knew it wouldn't last long. As Robert and his men huddled in the main room, she and Granny Moss exchanged a look that said everything words couldn't. This was their moment, maybe their last moment, to break free from this nightmare. "When I say run," Mary Beth whispered, "you head for the old church ruins north of here. Lily May will find you there. What about you, child? I'm going to make sure they follow me instead of you. Somebody's got to keep them busy while you get to safety." Granny Moss grabbed Mary Beth's hand with fingers strong as iron despite their age. "You're barely more than a baby yourself. I should be the one—" "No," Mary Beth said firmly. "You got a grandson to live for. I got nothing left to lose." When the lightning flashed next, illuminating the cabin like daylight, Mary Beth made her move. She kicked over the oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness, then burst through the back window like a woman possessed by holy fire. "She's running!" Robert roared behind her. "Don't let her get away!" Mary Beth ran through that storm like the devil himself was chasing her, which in a way he was. Her bare feet slipped and slid in the mud, and branches tore at her nightdress until it hung in tatters, but she kept moving. Behind her she could hear Robert's men crashing through the underbrush, their curses and shouts growing closer with every step. The swamp in a thunderstorm was like something out of a nightmare. Water rose around her ankles, then her knees as she splashed through hidden pools and fought her way past cypress trees that loomed like ancient guardians. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, showing her glimpses of her pursuers getting closer and closer. "There she is," one of them yelled. "Cut her off at the creek." Mary Beth's heart nearly stopped when she realized they were herding her like a wild animal, driving her toward a dead end where the water ran too deep and fast to cross. But just when despair started to sink its claws into her soul, she remembered something her mama used to tell her. When you can't go around trouble, sugar, sometimes you gotta go through it. She plunged into that rushing creek without hesitation, letting the current carry her downstream faster than any horse could run. The water was cold as ice and black as sin, but it was also her salvation. She could hear Robert screaming with rage as she disappeared around a bend, swept away by the flood like Moses escaping from Pharaoh's army. For what felt like hours, Mary Beth fought to keep her head above water, grabbing onto fallen logs and floating debris whenever she could. Her lungs burned like fire, and her body went numb from the cold, but she held on with the desperate strength that only comes from knowing you're fighting for your very life. When she finally washed up on a muddy bank miles downstream, she could barely crawl out of the water. Her whole body shook like leaves in a hurricane, and she'd lost one of her shoes somewhere in the flood. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was free. The old church ruins Granny Moss had mentioned stood on a small hill about a mile from where Mary Beth had landed. It took her the better part of the night to reach it, crawling and stumbling through thorns and briars that tore at her skin. But when she finally collapsed in the shadow of them crumbling walls, she found Granny Moss waiting for her with tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. "Child, I thought you were dead for sure," the old woman sobbed, wrapping Mary Beth in her own shawl. "When I heard them guns firing and all that shouting—" "They were shooting?" Mary Beth asked too, exhausted to feel afraid, like they was hunting wild boars. "But the Lord protected you just like he protected Daniel in the lion's den." They huddled together in them ruins for 3 days, surviving on rainwater and wild berries, waiting for their strength to return. On the third morning, they heard hoofbeats approaching and feared the worst. But instead of Robert's men, they saw Lily May riding toward them on an old mule, her face shining with hope for the first time since Mary Beth had known her. "Miss Mary Beth, Granny Moss," she called out. "Y'all alive? Praise the Lord, you're both alive." "Did you find the preacher?" Mary Beth asked, her voice hoarse as a bullfrog's. Lily May's smile could have lit up the darkest night. "Better than that, ma'am. I found somebody who's going to listen to every word we got to say. Somebody with enough power to make Robert and all his friends pay for what they done." As Lily May helped them onto that old mule, Mary Beth felt something, she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, honest-to-goodness hope that justice might finally be served and them innocent children might finally be saved. But the road ahead was still dangerous as a nest of rattlesnakes, and Mary Beth knew that Robert wouldn't give up easily. He'd hunt them to the ends of the earth before he'd let his secrets be exposed. What she didn't know was that while she'd been fighting for her life in that swamp, other forces had been moving in the shadows, forces that would soon turn the hunter into the hunted. Sweet Jesus, what happened next was like watching David prepare to face Goliath, except this time David was a broken woman with nothing but truth as her weapon against a giant made of money, power, and pure evil. But sometimes the Lord works through the most unlikely vessels to bring his justice to earth. The person Lily May had found wasn't who Mary Beth expected at all. Sister Margaret O'Brien was an Irish nun who'd come down from Boston sent by something called the Underground Railroad to investigate reports of missing children in the Mississippi Delta. She was a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but when Mary Beth looked into her green eyes, she saw steel that had been forged in the fires of righteous anger. "Child," Sister Margaret said, taking Mary Beth's trembling hands in her own, "I've been praying for months that someone would come forward with evidence against these devils. The Lord has answered my prayers through you." They met in an abandoned cotton gin outside Natchez, far from Robert's reach, but close enough to civilization that help could come if needed. Sister Margaret had already gathered testimonies from other survivors, women who'd escaped from similar situations in Louisiana and Arkansas. Mary Beth wasn't alone in her suffering, and that knowledge was both a comfort and a heartbreak. "How many?" Mary Beth asked, her voice barely above a whisky. "How many women like me?" "Too many," Sister Margaret replied, her jaw set like stone. "This network of evil reaches from Texas to Georgia, sugar. Rich men buying and selling human misery like it was cotton or tobacco. But with your evidence, that journal you copied, we might finally have enough to bring them all down." The nun had brought with her a federal marshal named Samuel Hayes, a big man with kind eyes who'd been tracking Robert's operation for 2 years. When he examined the copied pages from Robert's journal, his face went white as freshly fallen snow or die. "Have mercy," Marshal Hayes whispered. "This here's enough evidence to hang half the respectable men in 3 states. Names, dates, amounts of money. It's all here in black and white." But even as hope bloomed in Mary Beth's heart like spring flowers, she knew the fight was far from over. Robert had powerful friends, and powerful friends had ways of making problems disappear, including troublesome witnesses. "He'll come after us," Mary Beth warned. "Robert won't just let us walk away. He's got too much to lose." "Let him come," Sister Margaret said, her voice calm as still water, but her eyes blazing with holy fire. "We've got the Lord on our side, and that's more powerful than all of Robert's money and influence put together." The next weeks were like living through a war. Sister Margaret moved Mary Beth, Granny Moss, and Lily May to a safe house run by Christian abolitionists, good people who risked their own lives to help those who couldn't help themselves. There, Mary Beth slowly recovered her strength while they prepared their case. But the hardest part wasn't healing her body. It was proving she wasn't crazy. Robert had done his work well, spreading word throughout the county that his poor wife had suffered a complete mental breakdown. He'd even had her declared legally insane by Judge Blackwood, making her testimony worthless in any court of law. "We need to reverse that ruling," Marshal Hayes explained during one of their planning sessions. "But to do that, we need a doctor willing to examine you and testify that you're of sound mind." That's when the Lord provided another miracle. Dr. William Hayes, the Marshal's younger brother, had just returned from medical school up north, full of new ideas about treating patients with respect and dignity. When he examined Mary Beth, he was appalled by what had been done to her. "This woman shows clear signs of prolonged drugging with laudanum and other narcotics," Dr. Hayes told his brother after the examination. "But her mind is sharp as a razor, and her memory of events is consistent and detailed. She's no more insane than you or I." Getting a hearing before an honest judge took months of careful maneuvering. Robert's influence ran deep, but Sister Margaret had connections of her own, Christian judges and lawyers who believed that justice was more important than political convenience. The breakthrough came when they discovered that Judge Blackwood himself was mentioned in Robert's journal. Faced with exposure of his own crimes, the corrupt judge suddenly found religion and agreed to cooperate with the federal investigation. "I was blackmailed," Judge Blackwood confessed, tears streaming down his face during a secret meeting. "Robert had photographs, evidence of things I'd done when I was younger, and more foolish. He said if I didn't declare his wife insane, he'd ruin me and my family. With Judge Blackwood's testimony, the house of cards began to tumble. One by one, other victims came forward, women who'd been silenced by fear, families who'd been told their missing daughters had run away or died of mysterious illnesses. But Robert wasn't going down without a fight. When he realized the net was closing around him, he became desperate as a cornered wildcat. Word reached Mary Beth that he'd put a price on her head, $500 to anyone who could bring her back for medical treatment. He's scared, Sister Margaret observed. Scared men make mistakes, and mistakes give us opportunities. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One of Robert's own men, a rough character named Bull Morrison, came to Sister Margaret claiming he wanted to make amends for his past sins. I got a little girl of my own, Bull confessed, hat in his hands and tears in his eyes. When I saw what was happening to them other children, I couldn't sleep no more, kept seeing my Sarah's face in theirs. Bull provided the final piece of evidence they needed, the location of Robert's main holding facility and the names of all his associates. But more importantly, he revealed that Robert was planning to eliminate all the remaining witnesses, including the children still being held prisoner. He's fixing to move them girls to a boat on the river, Bull warned. Says he's going to take them to New Orleans and sell them to men who won't ask questions. We got maybe 2 days before they're gone forever. Mary Beth felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. After everything she'd been through, after all the suffering and fighting, those innocent children were still in danger. But this time she wasn't powerless to help them. We got to save them, she declared, standing up straighter than she had in months. I don't care how dangerous it is. We can't let Robert hurt another soul. Marshal Hayes organized a raid with federal agents and local law enforcement officers who weren't in Robert's pocket. But on the night before the operation, Mary Beth made a decision that shocked everyone. I'm going with you, she announced. Absolutely not, Sister Margaret protested. You've been through enough, child. Let the law handle this. Those girls need to see a friendly face, Mary Beth insisted. They need to know that someone who understands their pain is there to help them. I have to go. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his face filled with admiration for this broken woman who'd found the strength to fight for others. I'll go too, he said, quietly. Someone needs to tend to those children's medical needs. As they prepared for the raid, Mary Beth spent the evening in prayer, asking the Lord for strength and courage. She thought about her mama, still back in Alabama, probably believing her daughter was living happily ever after. She thought about Miss Emma's words, "A woman alone in this world ain't worth nothing." But Miss Emma had been wrong. A woman with the truth and the courage to speak it was worth everything. And tomorrow, Mary Beth was going to prove just how much one determined woman could accomplish when she put her faith in the Lord and refused to give up. The raid was set for dawn, when Robert's guards would be tired and less alert. But what Mary Beth didn't know was that Robert had learned about their plans and was preparing a trap that would test her faith and courage like nothing she'd ever faced before. The final battle between good and evil was about to begin, and only the Lord knew who would emerge victorious when the smoke cleared. Glory to the Lord Almighty. What happened at dawn that morning was like watching the walls of Jericho come tumbling down, except this time it was built on human suffering instead of stone. When good finally faces evil head-on with the Lord's truth as its weapon, ain't no power on earth can stand against it. The raid began before the roosters started crowing, with Marshal Hayes and his federal agents surrounding Robert's riverboat operation like the hand of divine justice itself. Mary Beth rode with Dr. Hayes in a medical wagon, her heart pounding faster than a drumbeat in a gospel song, knowing that everything she'd suffered for had led to this moment. But Robert had indeed set a trap, and it was more diabolical than even Mary Beth had imagined. When they burst into the main holding area, they found the building empty except for one horrifying sight: Granny Moss tied to a chair in the center of the room, beaten and barely conscious. "It's a trap," Mary Beth screamed, but it was too late. Robert's men had surrounded the building, and suddenly the hunters had become the hunted. "Welcome to my farewell party," Robert's voice echoed from the shadows as he stepped into view, that same charming smile twisted into something that belonged in the pits of hell. "I figured if I was going down, I might as well take all my problems with me. But the Lord works in mysterious ways, and Robert had underestimated the power of people, united in righteous cause. Bull Morrison, the repentant guard, had brought more than just information. He'd brought every decent man he could find who was sick and tired of turning a blind eye to evil. The battle that followed wasn't fought with guns and violence, but with something far more powerful: the truth spoken by people who refused to be silenced anymore. One by one, other guards stepped forward, throwing down their weapons and confessing their crimes. Even some of Robert's wealthy associates, faced with federal charges and the collapse of their corrupt network, began cooperating with the authorities. "Where are the children?" Mary Beth demanded, standing face to face with the man who'd destroyed her life and the lives of so many others. Robert's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the coward underneath. "Gone," he snarled. "You'll never find them. Even if you arrest me, there's others who'll continue the business. You can't stop all of us." But he was wrong about that too. Sister Margaret had been busy during the weeks of preparation, working with the Underground Railroad and federal authorities to identify and raid similar operations across 3 states. The network was crumbling faster than a house built on sand. The children were found 3 hours later, hidden in an abandoned warehouse upriver. Lily May's little sister was among them, thin and frightened but alive. When Mary Beth held that poor child in her arms, feeling her shake with relief and terror, she knew that every moment of suffering had been worth it. "You're safe now, sugar," Mary Beth whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe and nobody's ever going to hurt you again." Dr. Hayes worked tirelessly to treat the rescued children, his gentle hands and kind words slowly helping them understand that not all adults meant them harm. Mary Beth stayed by his side, translating his medical terms into simple words the children could understand, becoming the bridge between their nightmare and their healing. The trials that followed stretched on for months, with Mary Beth testifying in courtrooms across the region. Each time she told her story, more victims found the courage to come forward. The network of corruption that had seemed so powerful and untouchable crumbled under the weight of accumulated testimony. Robert was sentenced to life in prison, though Mary Beth sometimes wondered if that was justice enough for all the lives he'd destroyed. Judge Blackwood lost his position and was imprisoned as well, though his cooperation had earned him a lighter sentence. Sheriff Briggs fled to Mexico rather than face trial, and Banker Thornton was found dead in his office, apparently by his own hand rather than face the shame of exposure. But the real victory wasn't in the punishments, it was in the healing that followed. Sister Margaret established a network of safe houses for rescued women and children, funded by donations from Christians across the country who were horrified by the revelations. Mary Beth became the first supervisor of the Mississippi branch, using her education and her experience to help other survivors rebuild their lives. Granny Moss recovered from her injuries and found peace in helping to care for Lily May's little sister and the other rescued children. "The Lord gave me a second chance to be a grandmother," she'd say, watching the children play in the garden behind the safe house. "This time, I ain't letting nothing bad happen to them babies." Lily May herself proved to have a gift for reading and writing, skills that Sister Margaret helped her develop. She became Mary Beth's assistant and eventually took over running the day-to-day operations of the safe house, turning her own suffering into strength that could help others. And Dr. William Hayes, well, he kept finding excuses to visit the safe house, always bringing medical supplies and kind words for the residents. It took him nearly a year to work up the courage to ask Mary Beth to walk with him in the garden one evening. "I know you've been through terrible things," he said, his hands nervous as a schoolboy's. "And I know you might never want to trust another man again. But Mary Beth, I've watched you transform your pain into purpose, and I'd be honored if you'd let me stand beside you in this work." Mary Beth looked at this good man who'd risked his own safety to help her and the children, and she saw something she'd never seen in Robert: genuine love and respect. "William," she said softly, "I'd like that very much." They were married 2 years later in the same church where Mary Beth had wed Robert, but this time the ceremony was filled with real joy and the presence of people who truly loved her. Lily May and Granny Moss stood as her family and the children. From the safe house scattered flower petals as she walked down the aisle. The safe house grew into a network of shelters across the South, each one staffed by survivors who understood that healing comes not from forgetting the past, but from transforming it into something that could help others. Mary Beth and William opened a medical clinic alongside the shelters, providing care for women and children who had nowhere else to turn. Years passed, and Mary Beth's hair turned silver, but her spirit remained strong as steel forged in fire. When her first granddaughter was born, she held that tiny baby and made the same promise her own mama had made. But this time, it was different. "Listen to me, little one," Mary Beth whispered to baby Sarah Elizabeth Hayes. "Don't you ever let nobody convince you that your truth is madness, sugar. A woman who knows her own strength in the Lord is what weak men fear most. But more than that, you remember that your strength ain't just for yourself. It's for lifting up others who can't find their own voice yet." The work continued long after Mary Beth was gone, a living testament to the truth that one person's courage to speak up can save countless lives. The network she'd helped build rescued thousands of women and children over the decades, proving that evil only triumphs when good people choose to stay silent. And if you listen real careful on quiet nights in Mississippi, folks say you can still hear Mary Beth's voice on the wind, whispering to women trapped in their own nightmares. Hold on, sugar. Help is coming. The Lord sees your suffering and He's preparing a way out. You just got to be brave enough to take it when it comes. Because sometimes the greatest victory ain't defeating your enemies. It's turning your worst pain into someone else's greatest hope. Y'all, the story of Mary Beth Coleman teaches us a truth that echoes through time like a church bell calling the faithful to worship. There ain't no situation so desperate that it can't be transformed by the courage of one person willing to fight for truth. Mary Beth started as a naive young woman who traded one hell for another, but she ended up as a woman who saved hundreds of lives and changed the destiny of an entire generation. She discovered that real power don't come from being protected by someone else, but from finding strength enough to protect others who can't protect themselves. The most powerful lesson of this story is that our worst moments can become the foundation of our greatest triumphs. Mary Beth could have let herself be broken by Robert's cruelty, by the drugs, by the isolation and the disbelief of everyone around her, but she chose to transform every scar into wisdom, every tear into compassion, and every moment of despair into determination that no other woman would go through what she went through. When we face our own battles, whether it's an abusive relationship, workplace injustice, or any situation where we feel powerless, the question ain't whether we're going to suffer, but what we're going to do with that suffering. How many Mary Beths exist around you right at this moment, waiting for someone to have the courage to see beyond appearances and offer help? Maybe it's a neighbor who always wears long sleeves even in the heat, a co-worker who never talks about personal life, or even someone in your own family who's silently crying for help. And you? What kind of Robert is controlling your life through fear, manipulation, or emotional blackmail? Could be an abusive boss, a toxic relationship, an addiction you're hiding, or even your own insecurities that keep you from seeking the life you deserve. What would your reaction be if you discovered today that someone close is living a secret? Hell, would you have Sister Margaret's courage to act? Or would you stay in your comfort zone pretending it ain't your problem? What pain in your own life can you transform into purpose to help others? Because the truth is, we all got scars. The question is whether we're going to use those scars to show others that it's possible to survive and thrive. If you could send a message to 18-year-old Mary Beth at the beginning of this story, what advice would you give? And more important, what advice would you give to your own younger self knowing what you know today? Don't let this story be just entertainment. Let it be a call to action. If you're living your own hell, know that there's hope and help available. If you know someone who needs help, be brave enough to offer it. And if you've already overcome your own battles, use your strength to lift up those who are still down. Life is waiting for you to choose. Are you going to be just another person who watches other people suffering? Or are you going to be someone who makes a difference? The world needs more folks like Mary Beth, Sister Margaret, and Dr. William Hayes. The world needs you. If this story touched your heart and opened your eyes to realities you might not have seen before, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you won't miss any of our stories that can change your life perspective. And now, click on the video appearing on your screen. Woman abandoned husband with 5 children on the farm. Years later, she came crawling back. An even more shocking story of courage and survival that will make you question everything you think you know about the limits of human resistance. Stay with us on this journey of stories that don't just entertain, but transform. Because we believe that every real story has the power to change a life, and maybe that life is yours.